She told a friend she was scared for her life. 17 days later, her body was found in the woods of South Carolina. She was 39 years old. She had a husband. She had a life that looked, from every angle anyone could see, completely intact. And yet someone who loved her knew something was wrong long before the rest of the world had any reason to look. Tonight, we are not here to speculate. We are here to walk through what is documented, what was witnessed, and what the people closest to Elena Catherine Moore said, saw, and could not forget. This is her story, told carefully, told completely, and told the way she deserves. If you are watching Midnight Evidence for the first time, this is exactly the kind of coverage we bring you. No rushing to conclusions, no filling in blanks that the evidence itself has not filled in. Just the truth, laid out clearly, so you can follow it yourself. Hit that like button if you appreciate that approach, and subscribe to Midnight Evidence so you never miss another case like this one. Now, let us go back to where this story actually begins. Elena Catherine Moore was 39 years old and lived in the Lexington and Irmo area of South Carolina. She was not someone who existed quietly at the edges of other people's lives. She was the center of them. She worked as a personal trainer at Wolf's Fitness Center, and for her clients, she was far more than someone counting repetitions and tracking progress. She built her schedule around their goals, their early mornings, their difficult evenings, their hardest weeks, and their smallest victories. She remembered the details that most people forget: a stressful presentation at work, a parent recovering from surgery, a hard anniversary coming up on the calendar. She held those things with her between sessions, and when clients came back through the door, she already knew what to ask about. That kind of attentiveness is not something you can train into someone. It is either there or it is not. In Elena, it was always there. She also worked as a pharmacy technician, which meant her week was filled twice over with people who needed something from her. Behind that counter, she was not handling transactions. She was handling the quiet, vulnerable parts of people's lives, their health, their medications, the things most people do not discuss freely with strangers. And somehow, with Elena, it never felt like sharing with a stranger. It felt like being known. Between the gym and the pharmacy, she was woven into the daily fabric of more lives than most people ever realize about someone until that person is gone. Her friends describe her with a consistency that itself says something significant. Warm, present. The kind of listener who made you feel like what you were saying was the only thing that mattered in that moment. She was the person her friends called first when something went wrong. Not because she had all the answers, but because she had a way of making sure no one felt like they were carrying their weight alone. She showed up for that role year after year, quietly and without complaint. And because she was always the one doing the checking in, the one asking how everyone else was holding up, it never occurred to most people to turn that question back around on her. That is the quiet cost of being that kind of person. You become so associated with strength that your own struggles become invisible to the people who would have helped you carry them. Beneath the steadiness that everyone else saw, there was a part of Elena's life that almost no one outside her innermost circle ever had access to. She and her husband, Brandon Slice, had been together for more than 13 years before she disappeared. That is over a decade of shared history, of accumulated routines and milestones, and the kind of familiarity that becomes its own gravity. They were married on February 29, 2024, a leap day, a date that only arrives once every 4 years, a date you choose deliberately, because it means something to you, because you want the day to carry a weight that ordinary days do not. But the private reality of that relationship stretched back much further than the wedding, and it carried details that the public celebration never reflected. In July of 2017, Elena reached out privately to a close friend named Aston Jeffcoat. In that conversation, she admitted something she had never said in any public setting. She was thinking about leaving the relationship. At that point, she and Brandon had been together for roughly 5 years. She told her friend she might end things. She spoke about needing a fresh start, about wanting room to breathe, about the possibility of building something new somewhere else. That message was not posted publicly. It was not shared widely. It was one woman, sitting somewhere private, typing the truth of how she felt to someone she trusted. 9 years before her name would ever appear in a headline, Elena Moore was already carrying that question: whether to stay or whether to leave. People closest to her describe what followed as a cycle. Not a single conversation, not a single decision, but a pattern that repeated across years. She would speak about leaving. Things between them would seem to settle. A period of relative calm would follow, and with it, a cautious return of hope. And then, eventually, the same doubts would come back, quiet and persistent, and impossible to bury for long. Close friends describe it as a wound that kept approaching the point of healing and then opening again. That kind of pattern is almost impossible to clearly see when you are inside it. It looks like a rough stretch. It feels like something that will eventually resolve. It is only later, looking back at the full shape of the timeline, that the pattern becomes unmistakable. Elena eventually married Brandon anyway, and from the outside, there was nothing that pointed to any of what she had privately shared. No visible tension, no public indication of trouble. Photographs showed a couple moving through the ordinary milestones of a long relationship. To anyone watching, she had built the life she wanted. Then, in the final months of her life, something surfaced that added an entirely different layer to the picture. A second Instagram account was discovered, separate from the profile her friends and family normally followed. A quieter, less visible corner of the internet where Elena appears to have allowed herself to say things she could not say out loud in her daily life. In May, she posted something that reads far less like a social media caption and far more like something written in the middle of a sleepless night. She wrote about someone allowing her to destroy herself in order to preserve something between them, and described the aftermath as an exhausting internal hatred directed at someone she had once loved deeply. That is not abstract language. That is the specific language of someone in the middle of something painful and private and unresolved. 2 months earlier, in March, she had reshared something with an entirely different emotional register. A passage about a conflict finally ending. About feeling lighter after carrying something heavy for a very long time. A small and fragile signal of hope from a woman who kept most of her emotional life carefully out of view. 2 posts, 2 completely different emotional states, and neither one names a single person. Her friend Mendy Miller later said that Elena had been working, in those final months, to remove what she called toxic people from her life. Not one person. People, plural. Which means the posts alone cannot be used to draw conclusions about any specific individual. Elena did not name anyone. That space belongs to her. About a month before she disappeared, Elena went silent online entirely, even on the accounts that her friends could see and follow. To someone who did not know her, that would not have registered as unusual. But to the people who did know her, the absence was immediate and striking. She had always been engaged, always present, always the one maintaining contact. Then, without explanation, that simply stopped. Her friend Lauren Beasley later said, their last real conversation happened around that same time and was entirely ordinary. Nothing personal came up. No concerns were raised. No indication of what was approaching. Just a normal exchange that neither of them knew was the last one they would ever have. Then, approximately 1 week before Elena vanished, something happened that the people who witnessed it have never been able to fully explain. A doorbell camera at an apartment building near her gym captured Elena at a stranger's front door. A food delivery had just been dropped off. Elena picked up the order. When the resident, a man who happened to share her last name despite having no relation to her, opened his door, Elena attempted to enter his home. He would later describe her as confused and disoriented. as though she was not fully certain of where she was or how she had arrived there. Approximately an hour later, a neighbor named Sarah Burles encountered Elena going through packages left outside a different apartment, packages that did not belong to her. When Burles gently asked what she was doing, Elena responded with 4 words. She said she had no idea. Burles later said that moment never left her, that she kept returning to the same question afterward. If Elena was that disoriented a full week before she disappeared, was she in that same condition the night she was gone for good? Her friend Sandre Campbell strongly rejected any interpretation that framed this behavior as evidence of a mental breakdown. She said Elena had always been honest with her about her mental health, and that the only thing Elena had ever described struggling with was anxiety, which means the question of what caused that confusion remains exactly that, a question, one of several in this case, that still does not have a clean answer. And the answers that do exist, we will get to those next. If this is your first time watching Midnight Evidence, now is the time to subscribe. This channel covers cases like Elena's, with the level of care and precision that real people and real families deserve. Like this video if it moved you. Subscribe to Midnight Evidence, so you are here when we continue. She had always been the one who showed up, for her clients, for her friends, for the strangers behind the pharmacy counter who needed someone steady on the other side of their hardest days. And then, in the final week of her life, the people who knew her best watched something shift in a way none of them had words for. Not a bad day, not ordinary stress, something that felt, in hindsight, like the first visible crack in something that had been under enormous pressure for a very long time. Her friend Sandre Campbell had known Elena well enough to know the difference between a woman struggling and a woman breaking. And in that final week, nothing she was seeing matched anything Elena had ever described about herself. Elena had always been open about her mental health. She had talked openly about anxiety. She had never once described anything like what the doorbell camera had captured. To Campbell, the pieces did not fit together into any picture she recognized. And then, 1 week after that disoriented evening near her gym, Elena Moore was gone. Thursday, June 11, 2026, began as an evening that would have meant nothing to anyone looking at it from the outside. A quiet weeknight in Lexington, South Carolina. The kind that passes without anyone thinking to hold on to it, because nothing about it announces itself as significant. At 6:40 in the evening, Elena checked into the Planet Fitness on Whitford Way. This was not unusual. It was her gym. The staff recognized her. The check-in system logged her arrival the same way it had logged it many times before. No one who saw her that evening had any reason to believe they were seeing her for the last time. There was no final conversation anyone recognized as such. No lingering pause at the door. Just a woman walking into a familiar building on an ordinary evening, carrying whatever she was carrying the way she always had, quietly and without letting it show. At some point after checking in, she left the building and walked in the direction of a wooded area situated behind a nearby Lowe's home improvement store. The next confirmed record of her existence came from a camera outside a Publix grocery store in the same area. The timestamp read 9:17 in the evening, nearly 3 hours after she had signed in at the gym. She was still wearing the same olive green hoodie and black athletic pants from earlier. And she was moving, not standing still, not waiting for anyone. Walking with what appeared to be clear direction toward Old Cherokee Road, a route that led in part back toward her own home. That footage is the last confirmed sighting anyone has of Elena Moore alive. A woman walking alone after dark, moving in the direction of everything familiar, with no indication on any camera, in any frame, that anything was wrong. And then the record simply ends. No further footage, no further sightings, no call, no message, no contact of any kind from that moment forward. A woman who had been clearly captured on camera, moving with purpose through a parking lot, vanished from every record that exists, and did not surface again for 6 days. Her husband reported her missing the following day. The response was immediate. A drone was deployed over the wooded area near where she had last been seen walking and returned with nothing. Officers conducted a detailed ground search of the woods along Common Farm Lane, behind both the Lowe's and the Planet Fitness. Authorities described it carefully, not as a recovery operation, but as a precise effort to rule out one location at a time. That distinction offered no comfort to anyone waiting for news. By Monday, June 15th, the search had expanded into something far larger. Lexington police were joined by the Lexington County Sheriff's Department, Lexington County Fire Services, emergency medical personnel, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, and the Department of Natural Resources. A coordinated multi-agency effort moved through the wooded terrain behind the commercial strip, where Elena had last been seen on camera. They searched thoroughly. They found nothing. Then came a moment that the people closest to Elena have described as one of the cruelest of those 6 days. At some point during the search, police posted information publicly suggesting Elena had been found. For a brief window of time, family members allowed themselves to believe the waiting was over. Shortly after, police retracted the report, calling it a false alarm and apologizing for the confusion. For a family that had already spent nearly a week not knowing, that brief, broken moment of hope made the silence that followed even harder to endure. 6 days of waking up and still not knowing. 6 days of checking a phone for a message that never came. 6 days of driving past the places she used to go, half expecting to see her there the way she had always been there before, and feeling the absence settle heavier with every passing hour. The silence did not ease. It accumulated. Then, on June 17th, everything shifted within the space of a single afternoon. At approximately 1:30 in the afternoon, a tip came in from a member of the community. The caller reported seeing Elena in the area of North Lake Drive and Old Cherokee Road, roughly a mile and a half from where she had last been captured on camera. Officers and emergency personnel moved into that area immediately and began an extensive search of the wooded ground along the road. At 2:48 in the afternoon, just over an hour after that search began, they found a body. Authorities were careful and deliberate in what they were willing to confirm in those first hours. What they did say was this: the clothing found on the body matched the description of what Elena had been wearing the night she disappeared. Close enough to be significant, not yet enough, in their words, to say with certainty. And in that gap between discovery and confirmation, an entire community held completely still. The moment the body was located, the Lexington Police Department formally requested that the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division take over responsibility for the death investigation. When reporters asked directly whether foul play was suspected, police gave a carefully worded non-answer, stating only that it was now an active investigation and that the determination would be made by SLED. 2 more days passed in that suspension between fear and confirmation, the kind of waiting where you already carry the weight of what you believe the answer will be, but still have to wait to hear it said aloud. On June 19th, the Lexington County Coroner's Office confirmed it. The body found in those woods was Elena Catherine Moore, a woman who had walked into a gym on an ordinary Thursday evening, been captured on camera moving steadily in the direction of home, and had been found 6 days later in a wooded area she had no known reason to enter, far from any place her story was ever supposed to end. On June 20th, an autopsy was conducted at the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston. Investigators were searching for an explanation. What the examination returned instead was an absence of one. No signs of trauma, no injuries of any kind, nothing that pointed clearly toward what had happened to her in her final hours. For a case already built on unanswered questions, this was perhaps the most unsettling finding of all. Not a conclusion, but a void where a conclusion should have been. The cause of death remains pending, with toxicology results, a review of her medical history, and further specialized testing still underway. In the days following the discovery, SLED assumed full leadership over every aspect of the continuing investigation. When a case escalates to that level, it reflects a deliberate recognition by local authorities that the circumstances require a depth of resources, expertise, and independence that exceeds what a standard investigation provides. Elena Moore's death, in the determination of those closest to the evidence, warranted nothing less. As of now, no charges have been filed. No arrest has been made. Investigators have confirmed on the record that Brandon Slice has not been named a person of interest in this case. Not everyone who knew Elena shares that framing. Her friend Sandre Campbell spoke directly to reporters, stating that she believed there had been serious problems in the marriage, that the couple had been in discussions about separating, and that she personally believed foul play was involved in Elena's death, describing specific details as red flags. A private investigator who identified himself as a friend of Brandon Slice offered a completely different account, describing the husband as deeply grieving and stating that Slice had intended to spend the remainder of his life with her. Both of those statements come from people living through loss, trying to make sense of events that resist any clean explanation. Neither represents a finding from law enforcement. They are two very different readings of the same set of facts, and only the forensic evidence will ultimately determine which account holds up. There is one additional verified detail that belongs in this account. A South Carolina news outlet, through a formal public records request, obtained documents related to an internal investigation involving Brandon Slice from his time serving as a narcotics detective, opened in late 2013. The documents, which are heavily redacted, describe questions raised at that time regarding his personal associations. This is a confirmed public record. It is also, by the reporting outlet's own acknowledgement, something that law enforcement has not connected in any way to Elena's death. It is included here only as part of the documented public record, and nothing beyond that. She told a friend she was scared for her life, weeks before her body was found in those woods. Those words carry a weight now that they did not carry when she first said them. Her friends carry that weight. Her clients carry it. Everyone who loved her is now left holding a statement that came before the worst, from a woman who was trying to tell someone that something had gone deeply wrong, without knowing how little time she had left to say it. This case remains open. The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division's investigation is ongoing. When toxicology results are returned, when a cause of death is formally determined, and when anything new is confirmed by those closest to the evidence, Midnight Evidence will be here to report exactly what has been established. Nothing assumed. Nothing beyond what the documentation supports. Elena Moore deserves that standard of care, and so does every person still waiting for the truth of what happened to her.